young boy. His name is Dashiell. He and his family live on the moon and are there going to be there for 3 years. Dashiell is into his 4th month of living on the moon, and he was very excited about getting to live on the moon. But then he finds out once he walks into his living city, he didn't even get to leave that area and go explore on the moon. So he's a little disappointed. One of the scientists that he is there with, and he knows pretty well, ends up dying. And Dashiell knows it was not an accident. And he wants to solve what happened to his friend. Want to know more? Read Space Case. It's awesome.
Tunes on this year's Bluebonnet book list. You don't want to not miss this book read. This is an incredible book. The library camp kids read it, and they are so ready with all their pranks, because this book's about pranking. And it's about a boy who's new into town, and he was famous for being a prankster at his old school. But at his new school, there may already be a prankster. And there is a crazy principal named Principal Barkin who is really weird. And so I can't wait for you to read about him. Find out what's up with a rubber chicken. Find out why a prankster needs a rubber chicken. And remember, library camp kids have a lot of pranks up their sleeve. So do Mrs. Blansett and Mrs. Hunt and Mrs. Hamilton. So you better read this book and get prepared for pranking. Read The Terrible Twos and you'll be ready.
A fine dessert. Do you love blackberries, sugar, and heavy cream mixed together? Well, in this book, you will find out how a recipe that started long time ago, called Blackberry Fool, has been passed down through the ages, and how you would pick the ingredients from the farm to finally just going to the grocery store and not having to work the fields anymore, to actually finding the recipe itself on the internet. It shows how this one recipe has been passed down from long ago all the way down to today's time, and how when you have a good recipe, it will last for ages. The way you make it might change, but the goodness of the recipe and the love that goes into it remains the same. A fine dessert.
Hi boys and girls, welcome to The Fog Diver. If you like Rick Riordan that wrote The Lightning Thief or The Five Kingdoms by Brandon Muell, you'll like this book. This book, once there was this fog that started rising and the earth was covered with this deadly white mist until nothing remained but the tops of mountains. Now all the humans clung to the mountain highest peaks to survive. And that's where the wealthy people lived. And then right there in the lower slopes was the junkyards. And that's where you meet the 5 characters, the 5 kids in this book. They're not brothers and sisters, but they're just like family. There's a lady that's gathered them up and has taken them in, and she's trying to help them survive. Her name is Mrs. E. Mrs. E gets deathly sick from the fog, and they have to get to Port Oro to get medicine to help her. And the kids, that's their job in the slum yards, is to travel above the mist and dive into the fog and try to get things to help them survive. Because if they don't have anything to sell, they don't have any food to eat, and they'll die. So they've got to travel to Port Oro. They've got to get enough money. They've got to sell enough things to get to Port Oro to help Mrs. E before she dies. Meanwhile, there's a mean King Cordok, and he's out to find one of those boys in that family and take him and use him as a slave. You've got to read Fog Diver. Find out if they save Mrs. E. Can they get to Port Oro? Will the king get the boy and use him as a slave? You've got to read this book. It's really good.
Hi readers, I suggest you read The Amazing Age of John Roy Lynch. It's about an African-American boy who grew up during the time of slavery, and he grows up, and whenever he becomes a teen, he sits outside a classroom. He teaches himself to read by listening outside somebody's schoolhouse, and he basically self-educates himself. By the end of the story, he becomes a congressman and is highly respected by all of his peers, whether they were African-American or white. I highly suggest you read this book. It is very educational, and I learned a ton, and I know you will too. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were filming, Mrs. Hamilton. This is my newest favorite book, Echo. Now, Echo
starts off with Otto being lost in a forbidden forest, and he gets rescued by 3 mysterious sisters, and they help him find his way home with a harmonica. You know, that musical instrument that you hold up to your mouth? Well, that musical instrument, the harmonica, plays a part in 3 other people's lives. Frederick in Germany, Ivy in California, and Michael in Pennsylvania. All 3 of them have very different stories, but they all are connected by the same harmonica. Read Echo, and you will find out how they are connected.